a stranger asked the widowed landowner for water. His kindness moved everyone. Soledad Fuentes set the rosary down on the chapel wall when she heard the gate. Bienvenidos a historias entre vidas. She did not go immediately. She had learned, in the 2 years she had been trying to restore the Hacienda Santa Lucia alone, that noises at the gate meant many things, and most of them required patience before they required action. She wiped her hands on her work apron. She had been repointing the chapel's south wall, pressing mortar into the cracks between the old stones with a wooden tool her late husband Marcos had made himself. And she looked at the rosary she had set down. Her mother's, a dark wooden bead rosary with a small silver medal of the Virgen de la Caridad that had gone gray with the years. She had been carrying it in her apron pocket every morning since Marcos died. The way you carry something you cannot explain, needing to carry. She was 58 years old, Soledad Fuentes de Castellanos. She had gray in her hair that she did not try to hide, and the particular posture of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that the posture has become structural. The hacienda had been in the Castellanos family for 4 generations, a coffee estate in the highlands above San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, where the fog came in before dawn and did not leave until mid-morning, and the cafetos grew up the hillside in dark green rows that smelled, in the flowering season, like something between jasmine and rain. Marcos had died 2 years before, leaving the hacienda in a condition that reflected the last decade of his illness. Roofs that needed attention, walls that needed repointing, the old chapel at the edge of the property that had been closed since a beam gave way in 2018. His family had expected Soledad to sell. She had not sold. She had not sold because the land was the only thing that felt continuous with the life she had known before Marcos got sick. Everything else had contracted, the social circle, the trips to San Cristobal, the dinners with neighbors that had quietly stopped when Marcos could no longer manage evenings. The hacienda had remained. The cafetos kept their calendar regardless of grief. In January they were pruned. In October they bore. In December they were harvested. The seasons did not adjust for sorrow, which was, Soledad had found, not cold comfort, but actual comfort. A rhythm that expected nothing from her and kept its schedule anyway. She had let most of the workers go in the first year and managed with Mateo and 2 seasonal hands and her own labor. In the second year, the harvest improved. She repaired the main roof. She decided to start on the chapel because Marcos had always said he would fix it, and the unfinished promise had sat in the air of the property like something that needed completing before anything else could settle. Old Mateo was the only farmhand who had stayed. He was 67, a Tzotzil man from a community 2 kilometers up the road, who had worked the cafetos for 30 years and knew the hacienda's land better than its owners ever had. When Soledad announced she was going to restore the chapel, he had said only, "That wall needs mortar and patience." He had brought her the wooden tool. He had not offered to help with the masonry because he understood, watching her, that she did not need help with the task. She needed to do it herself. There is a difference, and Mateo was old enough to know it. The gate noise came again. A knock. Deliberate. Not loud. Soledad crossed the yard to the gate. The pila in the center of the yard caught the morning light. The old stone basin her husband's grandfather had built, fed by a spring channel from the hillside, always running, always cold. She passed it without stopping, the way you pass things you have stopped noticing, and opened the gate. He was young, 25, perhaps 26. He carried nothing except a worn canvas bag and a quality of exhaustion that was not recent. Not from last night or 2 nights, but from a long string of nights that had stopped being distinguishable from each other. He was taller than she expected. with the look of someone who had been healthy once and had let the health go by necessity rather than neglect. His boots had been resoled. His shirt was clean, he had washed it recently, she could see, and put it back on damp. And that detail told her something about the kind of person he was trying to remain, despite everything. His left hand was wrapped in a cloth that had not been changed recently enough. "Excuse me, señora," he said. His Spanish had the particular flatness of someone from the north, from desert country, somewhere at great distance from these highlands. "Could I have some water?" She looked at the hand. "Come in," she said. "We'll see about the hand first." His name was Tomas. He gave his family name reluctantly, the way people give information they have learned to be careful with. And she did not press. He was from Sonora, he said. He had been traveling south for 6 weeks, working where there was work. A construction job in Tuxtla Gutierrez had ended badly. He did not elaborate, and she did not ask. And he had been walking since, roughly north to south through the highlands. And the hand had happened 4 days ago when a piece of corrugated metal at an abandoned roadside site had caught him across the palm. He had wrapped it with what he had. He had not had it looked at. Soledad cleaned and dressed the wound at the kitchen table with the practicality of a woman who has dealt with farm injuries for 30 years. He watched his own hand the whole time without expression. The way someone watches a thing that belongs to them but that they have temporarily lost authority over. "You'll need to keep it clean," she said. "Change the dressing tomorrow." "Yes, señora." "Where are you going?" A pause. "South. From Sonora to south. That's a long direction." He said nothing to that. But something in his face shifted slightly, the way the face of someone who has been alone for a long time shifts when they are in a room with another person who is not demanding anything from them. She gave him water, and then, because it was already past noon and she was going to eat regardless, she heated the black beans from the morning and made tortillas and put them on the table without ceremony. The way women in the campo feed people, not as a gesture, not as a question, simply as the next thing that happens when someone is hungry and there is food. He ate with the focused quietness of someone who has not eaten a full meal recently. Old Mateo came in from the cafetos in the afternoon and saw the young man sitting on the corridor, with his wrapped hand resting on his knee and his face turned toward the hillside, and said nothing. Because Mateo was a man who had long since learned that Soledad Fuentes' decisions did not require his commentary. He did, however, exchange a look with her over the young man's head when she brought out the afternoon coffee, a look that contained several observations and one mild question, to which she responded with a slight movement of her chin that said she had considered the same things and had made her calculation. "There's a room in the workers' quarters," she said to Tomas when he stood to go. "The roof is sound. You can stay until the hand heals. In exchange, there's work if you want it. Mortar and stone, mostly. The chapel." He looked at her. "Why?" he said. It was not an ungrateful question. It was the question of someone who has learned to look for the logic in generosity, because generosity without logic has cost him before. "Because the wall needs more hands than one," she said. "And because Mateo tells me the cafeto harvest in 3 months will need every worker we can find. And a man who knows how to use his hands is more useful in 3 months than he is today." She paused. "Those are the practical reasons. The other reason is that you looked at your own hand with the patience of someone who has learned not to complain. And I respect that." He stayed. The rhythm that developed in the days that followed was plain and without ceremony, which was what made it work. Thomas rose early. She heard him from the main house, crossing the yard in the dark before the fog had lifted. and was at the chapel wall before she had finished her first cup of coffee. She would find him there when she came out, already working, his back to her. The sound of the wooden tool against the stone mixing with the bird noise from the cafetos on the hillside. She brought 2 cups. She set one on the wall beside him, and they drank without talking, looking at the work from the previous day, making the silent calculation of how far the wall had come and how far it still had to go. Matteo observed this without comment for 3 days. On the 4th morning, he arrived with his own cup of coffee and sat on the old stone step of the chapel entrance and watched them work from there. And when Tomas asked him something about the mortar mix, specifically about a type of volcanic aggregate Matteo had mentioned once, Matteo put down his cup and showed him, pressing the material between his fingers, explaining the texture the wall required in this altitude, where the cold and the damp came from different directions. After that, Matteo worked on the chapel 3 mornings a week. He did not announce this. He simply appeared the way useful people appear when they have decided a thing needs doing. The pila in the center of the yard collected the day's fog every morning. The stone basin ran fuller in the fog season than in the dry months, fed by condensation from the hillside above as much as by the spring channel, and Tomas drew water from it every morning for the mortar, and sometimes stood at it for a moment before going back to the wall, the way you stand at a thing that is reliably there and let the reliability be what it is. What none of them knew yet, not Soledad, not Matteo, not Tomas himself, was that the south wall of the chapel had been keeping something for 80 years, and that the hands now pressing mortar into its face were the first hands in all that time that were close enough to find it. The town of San Andres Larrainzar, 2 kilometers down the road from the hacienda, had its opinions about this within 4 days, which was about how long it took for the woman who sold tortillas at the market to mention to 3 people that Soledad Fuentes had taken in a young man from the north, a stranger, nobody's son, and that he was living in the workers' quarters and working on the chapel wall. By the time it reached the ears of Professora Herminia, who organized the parish committee and considered herself the community's moral inventory, it had acquired several additional details that had not been in the original observation. And Professora Herminia had arrived at conclusions that she felt it her duty to share. Soledad is a woman alone, she said to the 3 women who had come to help fold the embroidered altar cloths on a Wednesday. A widow, a property owner. And she has brought a young man, nobody knows him, nobody can vouch for him, to live on her land. I'm not saying anything. I'm only saying that her late husband's family will have something to say about this. The 3 women said nothing, which Professora Herminia took as agreement, but which was in fact closer to the polite silence of people who had known Soledad Fuentes for 30 years and trusted her judgment more than Herminia's. Old Matteo, who heard the talk at the market the following Saturday and bought his corn flour without commenting, went back to the hacienda and told Soledad. She was at the chapel wall, pressing mortar with the wooden tool. "Let them talk," she said. "They'll talk more when the boy finds the money," Matteo said. She stopped pressing mortar. She looked at him. "What money?" "I don't know yet," Matteo said. "But that wall has been wrong since before your husband's father's time. And something inside it is wrong in a way that isn't mortar." He was right. Tomas found it on a Thursday, 12 days after his arrival, when the chisel he was using to clear an old section of the south wall's interior face struck something that was not stone and was not mortar and was not any of the things a wall should contain. He stopped. He looked at what the chisel had revealed. A cavity in the wall. Deliberate, sealed with a fitted stone that had been placed there by someone and plastered over. The stone came out with a steady pull. Inside the cavity, wrapped in rotted cloth that disintegrated at the touch, were 43 silver coins, old coins, colonial mint, heavy and dark with age, and a folded paper that had desiccated to near illegibility, but still held, at its center, the clear impression of a date, 1887, and a name, Castellanos. And then Thomas held the coins in his unwrapped hand, the healed one, and felt something he had not felt in a long time. The particular stillness of a person who has stumbled into something that is not theirs and knows it without being told, and who is deciding, in real time, what kind of person they are going to be about it. He brought them directly to Soledad, still in his working clothes, the cloth from his hand in his pocket. He set them on the kitchen table in a row without speaking, and then he set the folded paper beside them. He looked at her. She looked at the coins. Old Mateo came in from the corridor, unhurried, as if he had known this was coming, which perhaps he had. Soledad sat down at the table. She picked up one coin and turned it in her fingers. She looked at the date on the folded paper. Something crossed her face that Tomas could not read exactly. Not surprise, not greed, but something more complex, more internal. The face of a person who is revising a story she thought she already knew. My husband's family always said there was money hidden in that chapel, she said finally. From the time of the revolution, his great-grandfather buried something before they fled to the city. No one ever found it. She set the coin down. No one looked with the right tools. Tomas waited. They belong to the hacienda, he said. I'm telling you that clearly, before anything else. I know, she said. She looked at him. I'm telling you something too. You didn't have to bring them here. Yes, I did, he said. No, she said quietly. Not everyone would have. You should know that I know that. Mateo, from the doorway. The Castellanos' cousins in San Cristobal will hear about this by Monday. Let them, Soledad said. She picked up the rosary from her apron pocket. It had been there all morning, the dark wooden beads and the small silver medal, and set it on the table beside the coins. She looked at the two objects side by side, her mother's rosary and her husband's great-grandfather's silver. Then she said, We'll have Padre Esteban come from the parish to witness an inventory. Whatever is here, it goes on record, and the record goes to the family. Properly. And the chapel? Tomas said. We finished the chapel, she said. That was already the plan. The cousins did come. 2 of them, from San Cristobal, on the following Tuesday. Marcos's younger cousins, Bernardo and Jacinto, who had visited the hacienda perhaps 3 times in 15 years, and who arrived with the energy of people who believe that proximity to an event entitles them to a share of it. They sat in the sala and looked at the documented inventory Padre Esteban had witnessed. And they looked at Soledad. And Bernardo said, Of course, this all needs to be handled through the family. We'll need to engage a lawyer. You're welcome to engage a lawyer, Soledad said. The hacienda is registered in my name. The chapel is on hacienda property. The coins were found by a worker employed by me on that property. Padre Esteban witnessed the full inventory and has a copy. I've sent a copy to the civil registry in San Cristobal. She folded her hands on the table, the way a woman folds her hands when she has said what needs to be said and does not intend to repeat it. If the family would like to make a claim through legal channels, that is your right. I am not preventing it. But the documentation exists, and it is in order. Jacinto looked at Tomas, who was sitting in the corner of the room and who had not spoken. And this one? And this, Jacinto said. Who is he? He's the man who found the coins and brought them to me immediately, Soledad said. His name is Tomas. He works here. Bernardo said, with the particular tone of someone who believes that tone can substitute for argument. Soledad, you have to understand how this looks. A widow alone, a stranger from the north. What it looks like, Soledad said, is a woman who asked a young man for help with a wall and got help with a wall. And a young man who, when he found something valuable that wasn't his, returned it without hesitation. She looked at Bernardo. I'm not sure which part of that is the problem. Bernardo started to speak. Old Mateo, who had been standing near the door the entire time, said, The coffee harvest starts in October, Don Bernardo. Will either of you be coming to help with that? The cousins left the same afternoon, without the lawyer and without anything else. Padre Esteban, who had stayed for coffee, watched their truck go down the road and said, mostly to himself, The chapel will be beautiful when it's finished. It will, Soledad said. She was holding the rosary. She looked at Mateo and then at Tomas. It will take another month at least. Tomas said, I'll be here. 3 months later, when the fog was arriving later in the mornings and the cafetos were heavy with red cherries and the harvest had begun in earnest, the chapel of the Hacienda Santa Lucia was whole again. The beam above the doorway was new timber, cut from the property's own lumber. The south wall was smooth and solid, the mortar set and cured. The small altar at the front held fresh flowers from the garden, marigolds and white lilies from the beds that Soledad had replanted in August. And on the altar, resting against the base of the old iron cross that had been there since the chapel was built, was the dark wooden rosary with its small silver medal, the one that had been in Soledad's apron pocket for 2 years. She had placed it there herself, on the morning the chapel was declared ready, and had stood in the doorway for a long time looking at it. Old Mateo had organized, without being asked, a Sunday gathering. The families from the 4 nearby coffee parcelas, the women from the market in San Andres Larrainzar, Padre Esteban, and the workers who had been part of the harvest. They came in the late morning with food and music, and the corridor of the hacienda held more people than it had held in years. And the sound was the sound of a place that has been quiet for too long and is learning again how to receive noise. Tomas was at the edge of the corridor, watching when Soledad came to stand beside him. She had changed into a clean dress. She was not wearing her apron for the first time in months. You stayed, she said. The harvest needed hands, he said. Yes, she said. It did. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the families in the yard, the children running between the cafeto rows at the edge of the property, the smoke from the cooking fires rising into the clear highland air. Are you still going south? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know where I'm going, he said. I stopped knowing that a while ago. She said nothing to that, but she put the coffee cup she was holding into his hand, because she had 2 and he had none, and she went back inside to help with the food. And he stood at the edge of the corridor with the cup in his hands and watched the Sunday move across the hacienda the way Sundays move across places that have finally found their footing again. Slowly, warmly, without hurry. Sometimes the most desperate moment of our lives is the one that opens the door we did not know we were standing outside. Sometimes a woman who is rebuilding a wall alone is not only rebuilding a wall, and sometimes the stranger who arrives at the gate asking for water carries, without knowing it, exactly what the place has been waiting for. Not the silver in the chapel wall, which was only money, but the honesty that put it on the table. Have you ever had to let go of something you loved in order to receive what you truly needed? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if this story found something in you, share it with someone today. She only knew the gathering was real, and that when the next stranger knocked at the gate of the Hacienda Santa Lucia, the answer would be the same as it had always been, now that she had remembered what the answer was.